Hello, everyone. My name is Khalid. I'm an editorial fellow at the Journal of Immunotherapy and Precision Oncology, and I'm honored to be introducing Dr. Mark Lewis with us today, who will be talking about the editorial that he published in our journal, The Return of Results to Patients, A Gesture of Respect and Responsibility. Dr. Lewis, do you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, thank you so much, Khalid. My name is Mark Lewis. I am a medical oncologist. I'm the director of gastrointestinal oncology at Intermountain Healthcare, which is a system based in Utah that covers most of the Intermountain West region. And just an honor to talk to you today, especially about this article, because I think it's a really important topic that our community needs to address.
Absolutely, agreed. Do you want to share just generally your opinion that you're presenting in your editorial?
Certainly. My sense is that research should be a bidirectional exchange of information. And I'll even go so far as to invoke a social contract where when patients are enrolling in clinical trials, I think that is such a sign of their trust in us as clinicians and as scientists. As you're well aware, often we are quite literally testing a as yet unproven hypothesis. And of course, as we move through the phases of clinical study in a very rigorous fashion, we sort of have a sense with each new phase and the confidence with which we can offer these treatments. But I also think that there's a trust that we might not be meeting. And I don't know if we're reciprocating the patients in terms of this information exchange. And the incident that brought about this editorial, if you don't mind just elaborating a little bit, I won't reveal anybody's privacy. It was a really touching and posthumous return of results. So several years ago, I had the honor of taking care of a young man who, frankly, his only therapeutic option was a clinical trial of immunotherapy in a very rare cancer. And he died of his disease. In frankly, a agonizingly rapid fashion. I was frankly shocked, even as an oncologist. I was shocked by how quickly he declined. However, he was very gracious to enroll in this study, and he basically asked me if once the study matured, if I would return the results to his wife, now his widow. And the happy part of the story is that earlier this year, that study matured. And as you know, this is not always the case, but it matured and it was a positive result. It showed that there was indeed therapeutic benefit for this then experimental and now hopefully conventional immunotherapy in his cancer type. And when I reached out to his widow, as I promised to do, first of all, having that kind of posthumous contact with the family, I have to tell you, is almost always gratifying. It really is, I think, a reminder to them that we do not forget about the patients that we've taken care of in the past. But what was even more touching, honestly, was just how gracious she was. I had these reservations even to call her Khalid because I don't know how to say this. I didn't want to seem like I was gloating. I didn't want to be telling her that, oh, by the way, other patients have actually derived survival benefit where your poor late husband did not. But she could not have been nicer about it. And what really got to me, and the reason I wrote the piece, was she said, he would have wanted to know that even one person was being helped by this work. I'm sorry, teary just thinking about it, but it made me realize, okay, this is a dramatic, you can argue emotionally extreme example, but I wondered how often are we not doing this, even with patients who are still with us, whether or not studies are positive or negative. And I think the larger conversation we need to be having in the oncology community, especially as scientists, is the length of time that elapses between enrollment, the completion of a study in terms of active treatment, and then its maturation. As we know, that can take years. It depends on your endpoint, right?
Sure.
And for us to be really confident about, say, a phase 3 trial, it's often very appropriate that follow-up be lengthy. But I think what's happening is it's very easy then to forget about the very study participants who gave of themselves to drive progress. And I think we need to have, frankly, more formal mechanisms in place so that we're returning results to these people. And what I would put to you, Khalid, is, when you think about any system, it is much harder to have to opt into something than to opt out of it. So I actually think this should be our default. Again, the slightly off-topic example I give is if you look at countries where you have to opt out of organ donation, they have much higher rates of organ donors than systems like ours, where largely you're opting in. I would say it should be the same thing here. I don't really understand why we haven't standardized a return of results mechanism. And the last thing I'll say, and it's slightly divergent, but I think still relevant, is where we put the results, even when they're positive, is often out of reach to patients. So again, thinking about phases, really promising phase 1 work and exciting phase 2 work will probably get presented in abstract and or oral form at a meeting. Even in the times of COVID, that hasn't gone away. But those conferences tend to be closed. They tend to be, attending them tends to be a privilege of our profession. And they're famously not that receptive to patients and advocates attending. And then lastly, sort of the gold standard of our field, right, is the evidence base that we accrue iteratively in our peer-reviewed literature. I think you probably know where I'm going with this. Paywalls are so difficult and frankly, in many cases, cost prohibitive for patients and advocates to navigate, even if some or all of the research they participated in, including themselves, was funded using public research monies. So we've commodified the data to such an extent that we are then actually placing it literally and figuratively out of reach of the very people who helped us collect it in the first place. And that to me just seems wrong. And I think that part of the system is broken. And I also think if we're going to engender more trust going forward, again, I think that's the ultimate currency of research is an authentic belief in the good faith of us as researchers. I think it's really critical that we address this. And the paywalls are maddening because frankly, it's never been easier to share information with patients. It's frankly unforgivable in my mind that we are taking the easy out and saying, oh, we just can't do this. I mean, there's a host of ways you can do it. You can do it by email. You can do it through social media, and you can do it by making journals open access. So again, I'm sorry, this is turning into a soliloquy and not an interview, but these are the reasons I feel so passionate and why I felt stirred to write this particular piece, is it was so obviously emotionally wrought for me. But I thought, gosh, there's actually something here, there's a kernel that I think will resonate with colleagues like you and others.
No, absolutely, and thank you for sharing your thoughts and that very touching story. I mean, that's I think, and I completely agree. I mean, even for us as professionals in the field, it's hard for us to get access sometimes to these results and to these studies, and it's infuriating when you get that paywall that blocks you from seeing those results. And I mean, even for patients, I don't even think they'd know where to go to look for that information to start with. And I mean, they seem to join because they want to help contribute to the field, and if we can share that with them, I think that would be very rewarding. I agree. I think they would be much more likely to then participate even more afterwards.
That's right. I think sometimes you ask, well, what's in it for the researchers? Why would they do this? Well, I think that ultimately it creates a positive feedback loop where we're more likely to cultivate an atmosphere of trust and, for want of a better phrase, easier recruitment. It's interesting. I share this with other people. I'll share it with you. A couple of years ago, I did a Google search, and as you know, Google will autocomplete your search sometimes. And I typed in oncologists are, and frankly, I was horrified at the results. It said things like,
oh, no.
oncologists are murderers, oncologists are criminals.
Oh no.
Yeah, and it just went on and on. So I'm not trying to discourage you. I know you're entering our field, and we're thrilled to have you. And frankly, I think that image of us is improving, but it's only improving through quite deliberate efforts at humanism and transparency. And I think it's so easy actually for our critics to paint us as, mad scientists in white coats doing experiments. You hate to hear the phrase guinea pig, but again, it's quite easy to mischaracterize research as, really sort of the worst form of science. that neglects the research subject as a person. So much of our modern research ethics apparatus, I co-chair the IRB at my institution, is about actually respecting these people as human subjects. And again, it's not necessary. And in fact, it's striking to me that with all the other requirements to conduct clinical study, that we have not yet obligated this return of results. And I know what some people will say. They'll say, well, we can't guarantee that years later that we can get in touch with everyone. Fair enough. But that is not, to my mind, an excuse for saying, well, we're not going to try at all.
So along that point, sorry,
yeah, go ahead. No, please.
Along that point, I wanted to know kind of, in broad strokes, what you think would be like a good system, or how you would kind of envision a system that does this properly would look like.
So I want to be very careful in how I answer this, because I think digital equity is currently a very in vogue topic. Just as we're talking now, and I'm sure you've had the experience too as a clinician, we've really been able to mobilize platforms just like this one to contact our patients, via, for want of a better phrase, but a catch-all, telehealth. And I sit in Salt Lake City, Utah right now, but I'm licensed in 6 states, and again, I can contact patients in a huge geographic expanse. And I have to tell you, it's been super, super rewarding. So I'm getting at 2 things. Number one is, in this modern technology, and this may actually be one of the silver linings of the pandemic, has shown us that we can make secure contact with patients in a manner that doesn't require them to come into our centers in person, which of course is an opportunity cost at the very least. But it's also, I think, leaving behind, some members of our society who are not privileged enough to have, a computer, a smartphone, an internet connection. Very, again, movingly, Khalid, I recently had someone who lived in a rural and frontier population here, and I was trying to set up telehealth with them, and they said, Dr. Lewis, not only do I not even have a device that can do that, I don't reliably have electricity. And again, I just realized my sort of assumed technological privilege there. But what I'm getting at is, most patients, I think we can assume these days, or at least maybe not assume, check. Most patients, if we check, I think will have access to some means of electronic communication, or even a phone number. And again, I know that years later these things change and go out of date, but I suspect the electronic delivery of results is a huge leap forward to having the person come back to the center where they were initially treated. In fact, even there, I think we've seen the geographic models of research change during the pandemic to really being less magnetized to tertiary and quaternary centers of research, and more kind of the hub and spoke model, where there might be certain interventions that have to be done at the center of that wheel, but a lot of the other parts of the care can be done much closer to home. And so I think what I'm getting at is, whenever the results are available, I think an electronic means of delivery is very appealing for those reasons. The other thing I would say, and I think you and I are going to talk about this, is I actually think it's important to let the patient know, regardless of whether the result is positive or negative. And again, those are actually, I guess, sort of qualitative terms of applied to quantitative outcomes. But you know what I mean is that there's a publication bias, of course, towards positive studies, results that are changing our practice, and that's appropriate. But again, the field is very, very dry in terms of publications, or even frankly presentations at conferences that address negative results. And I know it seems almost like we're kind of kicking the patients when they're down if we tell them that ultimately the trial they participated in was negative. I've had patients tell me, like, listen, I would want to know, doc, like, I gave of myself, I gave of my time, quite literally my energy, and I want to know, did that concept bear fruit or not? I have to tell you, there have been studies in the past, Khalid, where I have been so convinced of the biological plausibility that I think I came to the very precipice of overselling the concept to the patient. And then yet, when a phase 3 study say matured, the signal wasn't there. And I think we have to sacrifice our really wonderful ideas on the merciless altar of data. And I think it is then our duty to tell our patients what happened. And that in particular, it's not just that we're not reporting the positive trials back. the fact that we're not even doing that should tell you that we're definitely not reporting the negative trials back. In fact, so many of my patients, if they hear about it at all, it's because they're so savvy, and they end up of their own sort of devices, if you will, learning say a positive result. And that's the other thing I would tell our group is that, we underestimate the sophistication of our patients at their sort of at the risk of condescending to them at our own peril, because paternalism was the model where you or I walked into a room and said, this is what you're going to do. Mm-hmm. And our directive was just followed, without question. And now in the era of shared decision making, I am frankly amazed at the degree to which patients will advocate for themselves. And one of the ways they do that is their own online investigation. And short of these paywalls and short of our closed conferences, the playing field is getting pretty level in terms of information. And I think there's a real thirst there among these highly motivated patients. Because let's be honest, nothing's going to motivate you more than your own life being on the line. Sure. For us, this is a calling and a passion. But for the patients, it's literally, their longevity that is at risk. So I'm actually not that surprised when I think it through that they are this invested in this sort of information economy.
For sure. And I mean, putting myself in a patient's shoes, I would definitely rather hear about negative results than just have silence and participate and give labs and get imaging done and then not hear anything back in return. I think for sure I'd rather know negative resuls than hear nothing.
Nothing at all. Yeah,
exactly. Hear nothing back at all. I agree 100% on that. And I think you commented on this briefly, and I think part of the problem may be the general attitude towards negative results, including things like not publishing them and having a publication bias. Do you have any thoughts on how that attitude or that culture could be potentially improved, or we give more value to negative results or put more weight on negative results?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's important, and again, this goes actually beyond the quandary of communicating with patients. It's important that we know as researchers what's already been tried and, for want of a better phrase, failed, so that our ideas are truly original and we're not reinventing a broken wheel. So yeah, that's a really thorny issue and one that's vexed me for a long time. I think, again, I'm a huge evangelist for social media in oncology. And one of the reasons I'll tell you, and again, this is personal. So my father had cancer and died in 1994 and never saw really the internet. He never sent an email. He certainly never tweeted like his son does now. But my point is that yes, print and putting things in a paper journal that you hold in your hand, that costs money. There's no doubt about that. But and I know nothing is truly free. There's the effort that's expended, and there's some sort of digital housing of information. But those things aside, our ability to immediately self-publish and share around the world is, it's unprecedented. My dad never got to see it. I've actually described it as the second coming of the Gutenberg press. I think that's how revolutionary the last quarter century has been. So what I'm getting at is, it is increasingly indefensible to me to say, oh, we can't do it. Well, no, you can do it. It's just a matter of, where do you put it and how do you make it accessible? And my point about social media is, social media to me is very broadly a means of you can say self-expression, but here I'll say self-publication. As you think back kind of over the history of how things evolved, blogs were sort of people being able to self-publish, and Twitter is basically microblogging with a lot of linkage. So those kind of mechanisms, I actually think, allow us to share negative results, maybe again, not with the impact factor of the New England Journal of Medicine, sure, but it's out there, it's accessible, it's hopefully in some sort of open space where it can be found. So, if you and I had, say, an idea that we wanted to launch tomorrow, we could at least check with some sort of rudimentary search and make sure that it hadn't already been tried and been fruitless. Now, you can argue, well, done differently, different methodology, you get a different result. Fine. But at least let people know what's already been attempted. And I think that's really where we're lacking. And there's a whole other conversation we could have about, how positive studies lead people to be promoted faster than negative ones, even though a priori, the whole point of research is we don't know going into these things exactly what's going to bear fruit and what's not. I think that's finally maybe, Khalid, to bring it back around to the patients.
Yeah.
We owe them our candor that we are doing the trial because we do not know the outcome up front. And as I've said, unfortunately, our field is sort of littered with examples of things that looked super, super appealing
Absolutely.
in phase 2 and then just weren't there in phase 3. And this even happens at our biggest meetings. ASCO every year attracts some amount of critics who say, well, gosh, you're over promoting things and you're over promising too early. And it's true. I think I am guilty sometimes of I'll be going to say ASCO or my subspecialty ASCO GI, and I'll tell my patients, hey, listen, the reason I'm out of clinic next week, going to this conference, I'm pretty excited about it. And I've learned not to be too specific in that enthusiasm because sometimes they expect me to come back with something new for them or their disease. And as you know, that's not always the case. And we sometimes unfairly judge these meetings as to, did we come out of them with something that immediately changed the standard of care or not? I actually, preferentially remember the ASCO meetings that immediately altered my practice. And that's probably just a cognitive bias or human nature. But, the core of our conversation today is the responsibility of returning results, quote, good or bad, positive or negative. And I think using the relatively inexpensive and relatively easy digital tools at our fingertips to do so. And I think that really honors, again, the social contract that we enter into with patients when they allow us the privilege of conducting research with them.
That's wonderful. And I really like that point. That point resonated about the, just us kind of expressing our limits, that this is what we know, this is what we don't know, and being honest about that. In addition to sharing results with patients, also having that honest discussion about our limits with them.
It's hard, right? Because they come to us, sometimes expecting near omniscience, and there's a variety of ways that can manifest. One is, they expect us to know everything about a given topic. I don't know a single oncologist on the planet that knows everything about cancer. It's gotten so subspecialized that it's particularly difficult to practice with that kind of breadth. But more importantly, for each patient, they want to know their individual outcome. This comes up all the time. Doc, how long do I have? And that borders on playing God. And it's very important that we be candid that we don't know. So when I'm posed a question like that, I often demur and we'll give a range. But what I also do, Khalid, is I quote, this is coming back to our topic, I quote statistics from the literature, and I always attach the caveat that this person sitting in front of me is not a statistic. And the only reason I'm giving them the numbers, if they ask for them, is that's all I can do. I can use other people's experience in the past to look at the present and do my best to very hazily foresee the future. And that, again, just emphasizes the importance of research. It's not always even about the next cutting edge technology. It's about how is it informing the care of the people who are in front of us right now. Because again, take my patient. The innovation that will now help patients like him is come of age years after he passed. And that's still, I think, so heartwarming that he and now his widow wanted to know that, even though he obviously did not gain in that way. So again, it's a remarkable sort of N of one story, but at the end of the day, all of our patients are an N of one. And I think we need to respect their individuality and, again, respect them as autonomous agents. And part of that is they deserve to know what happens with the studies they participate in.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, thank you so much, Dr. Lewis. Thank you for sharing your, first of all, for writing this editorial and for sharing your opinion with us, for sharing your insight, your personal experiences, your personal stories. It was really wonderful to hear all of that. If you have any final comments, it would be great. That would be great to hear. For anybody who would like to read the editorial, they can find it on our journal website, the Journal of Immunotherapy and Precision Oncology. Dr. Lewis, any final thoughts?
Just that, to remember that the patient, it's very easy to sort of turn them into an abstraction, into a data point. But again, to end not on a morbid note, I hope, but I think an appropriately sobering one. When I look at a survival curve, I always have to remind myself, because we just see, Kaplan-Meier after Kaplan-Meier, each declivity in one of those curves represents a person. And we're talking about survival. It's either someone that was lost to follow-up or someone that died. And so those survival curves, sometimes they look fantastic, but if there's any, decline at all, those are people that we lost. And I think we have to respect what they gave to us.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Dr. Lewis. This was a wonderful, wonderful interview, wonderful talk. I've learned so much. Thank you again, and have a good day.
Well, thank you, Khalid. Thanks for the opportunity to publish in the journal. Appreciate it.